Well, it depends on who your leadership is and what you sign. China is already the largest trading partner to Africa.
Yes.
As you can see, there's a new scramble for Africa, and the traditional Europeans are now beginning to come back with Angela Merkel and Theresa May visiting Africa recently. Already, China has invested or have projects worth about $150 billion on the continent. And right now we have another $60 billion coming into it. The issues around the debt trap actually is not new, because you recall in the mid-70s, the American banks that were flush with the petrodollars started to lend money to the so-called third world, now emerging economies, and they said sovereigns could not go broke. That resulted in the first debt crisis, of which a lot of African countries were involved, and then the London Club and the Paris Club were used as a resolution mechanisms for those debt. So we have a legacy of debt in Africa from the Western powers, so be it. But this time around, we're looking at another one coming from the Chinese side. So invariably, it depends on how you manage it, because some African countries, China tends to collateralize their debts with national assets.
Yes.
And the whole essence of spending with a population of 1 billion, a lot of those loans in terms of the technology is not transferred, and a lot of the labor involved to deploy that infrastructure is also imported from China.
True.
So they have their own terms and conditions to those loans, and you, the person signing the loan, will have to see how it works for you. Ethiopia has done a very good job in terms of developing their infrastructure over the last 5 years with Chinese money. A lot of other countries are running into problems. But in Nigeria here, what we have is we have the Mambila Hydro, which is the biggest project to date, which is about $5 billion with some counterpart funding. So it depends on how you sign your transactions and how you sign your deals.
And those details are not really made known to us. For us to understand if we're going to be doing it, and if we're going to be using any of our national assets as a collateral, you know, of some sort. Because it's interesting you should mention that. I was just reading up a couple of reports a few days ago. I have a situation where you find the Chinese actually taking over certain airports, if possible, for a good number of years. And I keep saying we do not know what these, you know, agreements contain for us to understand how to address the issue. But Tilewa, clearly it is not a win-win situation. Well, China has the upper hand here. Because we talk about knowledge transfer, it's not coming. Labor, they're bringing their people in here to do the work as well. So really, where does West Africa stand in all of this?
Well, you must understand when you're going into any transaction, you must know what it's in there for you. We have a power deficit in Nigeria. Yes. If we build that project, the Mambila Hydro project, and we put 3,000 megawatts into our grid, and we can deliver that 3,000 megawatts, and we make sure that our pricing mechanisms are right, then we can recover the money and it makes sense. So you can get a loan, but you know that on the upside of the offtake side of that infrastructure, the revenues or the cash flows will sustain the payment of that facility, then you're winning too. But
let us focus really on this whole power sector thing. I like the way you just listed that. If we can add 3,000 megawatts, if we can ensure, of course, that the pricing mechanism is right. The other question there is how you get your money back. I mean, that is a major issue today. There are many Nigerians who are not paying for electricity use because, of course, there's a flaw in the whole metering system to begin with.
Yes, but that's so that we don't digress. That's one issue. If you don't sort that out, then do you now blame the Chinese?
No, that's my point.
So
exactly.
We see the Chinise have delivered the power plant. So if you cannot generate the electricity and recover the revenues to pay back the plant, then that's not the Chinese problem.
But we're actually getting into trouble in the future.
So that's if you don't manage it. The Chinese have delivered 3,000 megawatts for you. You can sell the 3,000 megawatts, pay back the loan, and continue to make money for years to come. So you have to understand how it's been managed. I'll give you an example. Dangote rolled out in the whole of Africa for its cement factories. What Dangote does is that Dangote goes all over the world and buys world-class cement equipment, not necessarily from China. But what China does for Dangote is to be able to do the EPC. They bring in the labor and then they install the factories at competitive rates, and they give him good financing for that. So he's been able to do that. MTN also has benefited from that in rolling out its Africa network. Huawei, the Chinese equipment supplier, comes in with good equipment and fantastic financing. Yes. They take it on and they have the revenues to be able to pay off the loan and continue to make profits. So the governments also have to be able to understand project finance, to be able to take the Chinese money and put it into bankable infrastructural projects, to be able to also put in the regulatory reforms that will ensure revenue assurance that will enable them to pay off the loans. So China will deliver your infrastructure projects for you, without a doubt. And I think they're good at that. And they have their terms and conditions. On the other side, you have to ensure that you can generate the revenues to pay off those loans and to be able to benefit from that infrastructure. We're
talking about these deals. Let's understand. I mean, it's very clear. China's put it out there. They're in Africa for what? To get resources to fill, their development goals. Yes. To market. We're already in Africa. We have that market to sustain, its growing economy. And then, of course, the third one has actually been added. It's for political alliances to support its aspirations to be a global influence. I mean, we actually see that already playing out. Let's talk about these resources, of course, for China's development. On one hand, like we've already established, you have China coming in here with the technology. Most of it has not been transferred. Labor is also from China. This time we're talking about taking out raw materials from Africa to China. Isn't there anywhere at all that we get something out of it? In terms of course, processing some of these raw materials. This discussion has been on over and over. I hear in Tanzania, and I'd like to repeat that over again, the president says, you know what, come in as investors, please do not come in as vendors. So whatever it is we give to you, we're going to add certain things to it. You do what you need to do, but do not come in here as traders, just come in to invest. But it seems it's otherwise in most West African countries.
No, I tend to disagree because, you see, we need to understand that China does not put a gun to your head and force you to sign the deal. Every country has to understand what China is doing and take advantage of it. Ethiopia has done it. Just what you're saying, the Ghanaian president also has focused on, you can't just come in here and take out raw bauxite. You have to add value and probably take out ingots because there must be value addition.